The Great Hall of the Interstellar Alliance was quiet. Representatives from 12 different species sat in their designated sections, each one watching the central platform with careful eyes. Ambassador Thelvok of the Varisian Federation adjusted his forearms nervously. His species had been part of the Alliance for 3,000 years, and never in all that time had they faced such a difficult choice. The Kethani swarm had broken through the outer defenses. 3 colony worlds had fallen in the past month. The creatures were unlike anything the Alliance had ever faced. They did not negotiate. They did not stop. They consumed everything in their path and moved on to the next target. The Alliance needed a supreme military leader, someone who could unite all the different fleets and armies under one command, someone who could stop the Kethani before they reached the core worlds. The problem was that no one could agree on who that person should be. The Varisians wanted Admiral Kethrin, their greatest military mind. The Threlkans demanded that their war chief Gorak be given command. The Silithans insisted that their hive coordinator was the only logical choice. Every species had their own candidate, and none of them were willing to accept anyone else. The debates had gone on for 2 weeks, 2 precious weeks while the Kethani continued their advance. Ambassador Thelvok looked across the hall at the human delegation. They were a young species, having only joined the Alliance 40 years ago. They were small compared to most of the other races, physically weak, with short lifespans. Most of the older species still considered them barely worth noticing. The human ambassador, a woman named Sarah Chen, caught his gaze and nodded politely. Her face showed none of the frustration that must have been building inside her. Humans were good at hiding their emotions, Thelvok had learned. The current speaker, a Threlkan delegate, was finishing his speech. It was the same argument they had heard a dozen times before. Their species was stronger, their warriors were braver, their tactics were superior. Therefore, their leader should be in charge. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Ambassador Chen raised her hand. The chairman, an elderly Silithian named Korvax, turned his compound eyes toward her. He seemed surprised that the humans wanted to speak. They had been quiet throughout most of the debates. "The human delegation has the floor," he said, his voice carrying through the translation systems. Sarah Chen stood up and walked to the central platform. She was small even by human standards, barely reaching the waist of the Threlkan who had just been speaking. But she moved with confidence, her back straight and her head held high. "Thank you, Chairman Korvax," she said. "I have listened to every argument made in this hall over the past 2 weeks. I have heard why the Varisians should lead, why the Threlkans should lead, why the Silithians should lead. I have heard all of it, and I understand the passion behind each argument." She paused, looking around the room. Every eye was on her now. "But the truth is that none of those arguments matter. Not right now. Because while we have been debating, the Kethani have taken another system. 12 million beings died yesterday because we could not agree on who should try to save them." There were murmurs throughout the hall. Some delegates looked angry, others looked ashamed. "The human delegation does not have a candidate for supreme military leader," Chen continued. "We are too young, too inexperienced in the ways of galactic warfare. Our fleets are small, our armies are limited. We know this." "Then why do you speak?" the Threlkan delegate demanded. "If you have nothing to offer, why waste our time?" Chen turned to face him directly. "Because we have a proposal. A way to break this deadlock that has paralyzed us all." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. With a press of a button, a holographic display appeared above the central platform. It showed a detailed analysis of every major battle the Kethani had fought since they first appeared. "We have been studying the enemy," Chen said. "Not just their tactics, but how our forces have responded. We looked at every engagement, every fleet action, every ground battle. We analyzed the performance of every commander who has faced the Kethani." The display changed. showing a list of names and statistics. Commanders from every species in the alliance were represented. Most of the battles were losses, Chen admitted. The Kethani are a terrible enemy, but some commanders did better than others. Some managed to slow the enemy advance, to save civilian ships, to buy time for evacuations. A few even managed to win minor victories. She pressed another button, and the list reorganized itself. Names moved up and down based on their performance ratings. We propose that the Alliance select its supreme military leader based on merit, Chen said. Not on politics, not on tradition, not on which species has the most influence. Pure performance. The commander who has shown the best results against the Kethani should be the one to lead us all. The hall erupted in noise. Delegates were talking over each other, some shouting in protest, others calling for order. Chairman Korvax had to bang his gavel several times before silence returned. "This is outrageous," the Varisian delegate said. "You cannot reduce leadership to mere numbers. There is art to war, tradition, honor." "Art and tradition and honor are meaningless if we all die," Chen replied calmly. "The Kethani do not care about our customs. They only understand one thing, winning. We need a leader who can beat them, regardless of what species they belong to." She looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of delegate after delegate. "I know this is difficult," she said. "Every species here has pride in their military traditions, but we are facing extinction. The Kethani will not stop until every world in this galaxy has been consumed. We need to put aside our differences and choose the best person for the job, whoever that person might be." Chairman Korvax leaned forward, his compound eyes studying the holographic display. "You said you analyzed performance. What did you find?" Chen nodded and pressed another button. The display shifted, showing the top performers across all categories: fleet tactics, ground combat, logistics, strategic planning. Each area had its own list of names. "The results are interesting," Chen said. "The top performers come from many different species. Admiral of the Varisians is excellent at fleet tactics. War Chief Gorak of the Threlkins has the best record in ground combat. The Silithian Hive Coordinator excels at logistics." She paused, her finger hovering over the control. "But when we look at overall performance, taking into account all factors, there is one name that appears at the top of every combined metric we can devise." She pressed the button. The display changed to show a single name, highlighted in gold. General Marcus Webb, human. The silence in the hall was absolute. General Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of the battleship Indomitable, watching the stars through the main viewport. At 62 years old, he had spent most of his life in military service. His hair had gone gray, his face was lined with age and stress, but his eyes were still sharp and his mind was still quick. He had never expected to be here. When the message came from Earth, telling him that the Alliance Council had voted to make him supreme military leader, he had thought it was a mistake. A human, leading the combined forces of 12 species. It seemed impossible. But here he was, 3 weeks into the job, trying to hold together a military force that did not trust him, did not respect him, and in some cases actively wanted him to fail. "General," a voice said behind him. "The commanders are assembled in the conference room." Webb turned to see his aide, Lieutenant Commander James Park. The young officer had been with him for 5 years, through 3 different postings. He was one of the few people Webb trusted completely. "Thank you, James. How are they feeling?" Park hesitated. "Hostile, sir. Admiral Kethrin barely acknowledged me when I entered. War Chief Gorak spent the whole time sharpening his war blade, and the Silithian representative keeps clicking in a way that my translator says means deep skepticism." Webb almost smiled. "So business as usual." "Yes, sir." The conference room was large enough to accommodate beings of all sizes, from the tiny Felixan scouts to the massive Threlkin warriors. The table in the center was oval-shaped, with chairs of different designs arranged around it. Holographic displays floated above the surface, showing the current state of the war. Webb walked in and took his place at the head of the table. He did not apologize for keeping them waiting. He had learned that any sign of weakness would be used against him. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I know some of you would rather be anywhere else, but we have a war to fight, and standing around being angry at each other will not win it." Admiral Kethrin, the Varisian commander, made a sound that the translator rendered as a snort. "And I suppose you have a plan to win this war, human." "I do," Webb replied. "But first I need to know what we are working with. I have read the reports, but reports only tell part of the story. I want to hear from each of you. What are your forces capable of? What are your weaknesses? What do you need that you do not have?" There was a moment of silence. The various commanders looked at each other, uncertain how to respond. Most of them were not used to being asked for their opinions. In their own militaries, the Supreme Commander gave orders and everyone else obeyed. Finally, it was the Felixan Scoutmaster who spoke first. Her name was Rilla, and she was barely 2 feet tall, with large eyes and delicate features. She looked like a child's toy, but Webb knew that her species were some of the best scouts in the galaxy. "My ships are fast," she said in her high-pitched voice. "We can go places others cannot, but we are few in number and we have no weapons that can hurt the Kethani directly. We can only watch and report." Webb nodded. "Watching and reporting is valuable. Information wins wars. What about the rest of you?" One by one, the other commanders spoke. The Varisians had the largest fleet, with hundreds of capital ships and thousands of smaller vessels. But their ships were designed for conventional warfare, not the swarm tactics of the Kethani. The Threlkins had the fiercest ground troops, warriors who lived for battle, but they struggled with discipline and coordination. The Silithians were masters of logistics and supply, but their military forces were small. Webb listened carefully to everything, asking questions, taking notes on his tablet. He did not interrupt or criticize. He just absorbed information like a sponge. When the last commander finished speaking, Webb stood up and walked to the main holographic display. He expanded it to show the entire theater of operations, the systems that had been lost, the systems that were threatened, the systems that were still safe. "The Kethani are strong," he said. "They have numbers, they have aggression, and they have no fear of death. But they also have weaknesses. They are not truly intelligent, not in the way we understand intelligence. They are a swarm driven by instinct rather than reason. They react to immediate threats rather than thinking ahead." He pointed to a system near the edge of the map. "This is the Velker system. It is strategically unimportant. A few mining stations, a small civilian population. The Kethani will pass it by on their way to more valuable targets." War Chief Gorak leaned forward, his massive frame making his chair creak. "You propose we defend an unimportant system. That is your great strategy." "No," Webb said. "I propose we attack from an unimportant system." He pressed a button and the display changed to show his plan. Attack vectors, fleet positions, timing charts. It was complex but elegant. "The Kethani are advancing along 3 main corridors," Webb explained. "Their main swarm is heading for the Tarsi's cluster. That is where everyone expects us to make our stand. That is where the Kethani expect us to be." He pointed to the Velker system again. "But if we position our forces here, in a system they will ignore, we can hit them from the side. Not the main swarm, but the support clusters that follow behind. The ones carrying the organic material they use to reproduce." Admiral Kethrin's 4 arms were moving rapidly, a sign of intense thought in his species. "You want to cut their supply line." "Exactly," Webb said. "The Kethani cannot reproduce without organic matter. They have been consuming everything they capture, using it to create more of themselves. If we destroy their supply clusters, we stop their growth, maybe even start to shrink their numbers." "It is risky," the Silithian coordinator said, its mandibles clicking rapidly. If we commit forces to this attack and it fails, we will have nothing left to defend the core worlds. Webb nodded. You are right. It is risky, but doing nothing is even riskier. The Kethani are getting stronger every day. If we sit back and defend, we will eventually be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. We need to take the fight to them, to make them react to us instead of the other way around. There was a long silence as the various commanders considered his words. Webb could see them thinking, weighing the risks and benefits. He did not push. He had made his case. Now it was up to them to decide if they would follow him. Finally, it was War Chief Gorek who spoke. I do not like you, human. I think your species is weak and soft, but this plan has courage. My warriors will join your attack. One by one, the other commanders agreed. Some were reluctant, some were enthusiastic, but in the end they all committed their forces to Webb's plan. As the meeting ended and the commanders filed out, Admiral Kethrin stopped beside Webb. I have fought in many wars, human. I have served under many commanders. None of them ever asked for my opinion before giving orders. Webb met his gaze. I am not them. I know what I do not know. And I know that you and the others have experience and knowledge that I lack. I would be a fool not to use it. The Varisian admiral was quiet for a moment, then made a gesture that the translator identified as respect. Perhaps the council made the right choice after all. He left, and Webb was alone with Lieutenant Commander Park. That went better than expected, Park said. Webb walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars. The battle is not won yet. We have a long way to go. But at least now they are willing to try. The Battle of Velker was unlike anything the Alliance had ever seen. 300 ships from 7 different species attacked the Kethani supply clusters in perfect coordination. The enemy had been caught completely off guard, expecting the Alliance forces to be defending the Tarsi's cluster as they always had before. General Webb watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the Indomitable. His hands were steady, but his heart was racing. Everything depended on this moment. Threlkin Strike Force engaging enemy cluster Alpha, the tactical officer reported. War Chief Gorak reports heavy resistance but is pushing through. Good, tell him to maintain pressure but watch his flanks. The Kethani will try to surround him. The holographic display showed the battle in real time. Blue markers for Alliance forces, red for the enemy. The blue markers were cutting through the red, destroying supply clusters one after another, but more red markers were appearing on the edge of the display. The main Kethani swarm had noticed the attack and was turning to respond. General Admiral Kethrin's voice came through the communicator. We have destroyed 8 supply clusters. The enemy is regrouping. Recommend we withdraw before the main swarm arrives. Webb studied the display. They had done more damage than he had hoped. 8 clusters represented millions of tons of organic material that the Kethani would never be able to use. But there were still more clusters out there, and the main swarm was coming fast. Agreed, he said. All forces begin withdrawal. We will regroup at Rally Point Gamma. The Alliance fleet began to pull back, the different ships moving in coordinated waves. It was not a retreat, not exactly. It was more like a strategic repositioning, a pulling back of the fist before the next punch. But the Kethani were fast, faster than anyone had expected. A group of them broke away from the main swarm and intercepted the rear guard of the Alliance fleet. The Silithian supply ships, slow and poorly armed, were caught in the open. General, the Silithian coordinator's voice was panicked. We are under attack, requesting immediate assistance. Webb did not hesitate. All available combat ships, redirect to protect the supply convoy. Indomitable is on its way. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Park said urgently. If we turn back now, we risk getting caught between the Kethani interceptors and the main swarm. I know, Webb said, but we are not leaving anyone behind. That is not how we do things. The Indomitable turned around. its engines burning at maximum power. Other ships followed, Threlkin destroyers and Varisian cruisers joining the rescue mission. They formed up around the supply convoy just as the Kethani interceptors arrived. The battle was brutal. The Kethani attacked without fear, throwing themselves at the Alliance ships in waves. For every one that was destroyed, 2 more took its place. The supply ships could not move fast enough to escape, so the combat ships had to hold the line. Damage to forward shields, the tactical officer reported. Hull breaches on decks 3 and 4. Casualties reported throughout the ship. Webb gripped the arms of his command chair. Keep firing. Do not give them an inch. The main swarm was getting closer. On the holographic display, the massive red blob was growing larger with each passing second. If it reached them before they could jump to safety, they would all be destroyed. And then something unexpected happened. A new group of blue markers appeared on the display, emerging from hyperspace on the far side of the battlefield. They were small markers, indicating small ships, the Felixan Scout Fleet. General Webb, Scoutmaster Rilla's voice came through the communicator. We tracked the main swarm's movements and calculated their approach vector. We have positioned ourselves in their path and are broadcasting false signals that mimic organic matter. The swarm is being drawn toward us. Webb looked at the display in amazement. The main swarm was indeed changing course, turning toward the Felixan scouts instead of continuing toward the Alliance fleet. Rilla, that is incredibly dangerous, if they catch you. They will not catch us, the tiny scoutmaster said confidently. Our ships are faster than anything in this galaxy. We will lead them on a chase while you escape. It is the least we can do after you risked your ship to save the Silithians. The diversion worked. The main swarm followed the Felixan scouts, drawn by the promise of organic material that was not really there. The remaining Kethani interceptors, cut off from the swarm's coordinating signals, became confused and disorganized. The Alliance fleet was able to destroy them and escape to hyperspace with the supply convoy intact. When they regrouped at Rally Point Gamma, the Silithian coordinator approached Webb with a gesture of profound gratitude. You could have left us, the Silithian said. It would have been the logical choice. We are not warriors. Our ships are not important to the battle fleet. Every ship is important, Webb said. Every life is important. We are fighting this war to save our people, all of our people. What would be the point if we abandoned some of them to save others? The Silithian was quiet for a long moment. Then it spoke again. I have served in the Alliance military for 60 cycles. I have served under commanders from many species. None of them would have done what you did today. They would have calculated the cost and benefit and decided that we were not worth saving. Webb nodded. That is the difference between humans and some other species. We do not calculate the value of a life. Every life has value. Every person deserves a chance to be saved. It is an illogical philosophy. Maybe, Webb admitted, but it is ours. The Battle of Velker was reported throughout the Alliance as a major victory. 8 Kethani supply clusters had been destroyed, setting back the enemy's reproduction by months. But more important than the military victory was the change in attitude among the Alliance forces. They had fought together, not just as separate fleets operating in the same area, but as one unified force. The Threlkins had trusted the Varisians to cover their advance. The Felixans had risked their lives to save ships from another species. The human general had turned his own flagship around to protect supply vessels that were not even from his species. Something had changed, something important. In the weeks that followed, more attacks were launched against the Kethani supply lines. Each one followed the same pattern as Velker. Hit hard, hit fast, then withdraw before the main swarm could respond. The different fleets worked together more smoothly each time, learning to trust each other, learning to communicate. General Webb spent long hours studying reports, planning operations, and meeting with his commanders. He listened to their concerns, incorporated their suggestions, and always took responsibility when things went wrong. He never blamed others for his mistakes, and he always shared credit for successes. Slowly, the attitude of the other species toward humans began to change. They were still seen as young and inexperienced, but now that was balanced by a growing respect for their leader. Webb was not the strongest or the smartest or the most experienced commander in the Alliance, but he had something that the others did not. He cared about every soldier under his command, regardless of what species they belonged to. And that, it turned out, made all the difference. 6 months into the campaign, the Kethani made their move. The main swarm, depleted by constant attacks on its supply lines but still massive, turned toward the Arteris system. It was the heart of the Alliance, home to billions of beings from dozens of species. If Arteris fell, the war was lost. General Webb stood before the Alliance Council, presenting his plan for the defense of Arteris. The chamber was packed with delegates from every member species, all of them looking to the human for guidance. "We cannot stop them with numbers," Webb said. "The swarm is too large. Even with all our forces combined, we would be overwhelmed in a direct battle." "Then what do you propose?" Ambassador Thelvok asked. "We cannot simply let them have Arteris." "No," Webb agreed. "We cannot, but we can use the system's defenses in ways the Kethani will not expect." He activated the holographic display, showing a detailed map of the Arteris system. It was a complex system, with multiple inhabited worlds, extensive asteroid belts, and a dense network of orbital stations and defense platforms. "The Kethani are driven by instinct," Webb explained. "They seek organic matter. They cannot help themselves. If they sense it, they will pursue it, even if it leads them into a trap." He pointed to the outer asteroid belt. "We are going to fill this region with bait. Organic compounds, biological waste, anything that will attract the swarm. We will make them think there is a massive concentration of food here, far from the inhabited worlds." "And when they come for the bait?" the Threlkin delegate asked. Webb smiled grimly. "We detonate the asteroids. We have been mining this belt for centuries. There are millions of mining charges scattered throughout the rocks. If we set them all off at once, while the swarm is in the middle of the field, you would destroy a significant portion of the swarm," Admiral Kethrin said, his eyes widening with understanding. "Perhaps enough to turn the tide." "That is my hope," Webb said, "but it requires perfect timing and coordination. Every ship, every station, every defense platform must work together. If even one part of the plan fails, we could lose everything." The council debated for hours. Some thought the plan was too risky. Others worried about the damage to the asteroid belt, which was a valuable source of minerals. But in the end, they voted to support Webb's strategy. There was simply no better option. The preparation took 3 weeks. Ships from every species in the Alliance worked together, seeding the asteroid belt with bait, positioning charges, setting up the communication systems that would coordinate the detonation. It was the largest military operation in Alliance history, involving millions of personnel and thousands of ships. And through it all, General Webb was everywhere. He inspected ships, met with commanders, walked through crowded stations talking to soldiers and civilians alike. He never seemed to rest, never seemed to slow down. His presence reassured people. If the human general believed they could win, then maybe they could. The day the Kethani arrived was the longest day of Webb's life. He watched from the command center on Arteris Prime as the first scouts reported contact. The swarm was coming, billions of creatures flowing through space like a living tide. Even depleted by months of warfare, it was still the largest concentration of Kethani ever recorded. "Begin Phase 1, Webb ordered. Activate the bait." Throughout the asteroid belt, containers of organic material began broadcasting their presence. The signals were irresistible to the Kethani, whose entire existence revolved around finding and consuming organic matter. The swarm changed course, drawn toward the promise of food. "It is working," Lieutenant Commander Park said, watching the tactical display. "They are entering the kill zone." Webb did not celebrate. He had learned long ago that battles could turn in an instant. Instead, he watched the numbers, counting the percentage of the swarm that had entered the asteroid belt. 50%, 60%, 70%. And then something went wrong. A group of Kethani broke away from the main swarm. They were not heading for the bait. They were heading directly for Arcturus Prime. "General, we have incoming," the tactical officer shouted. "Approximately 50,000 Kethani units are ignoring the bait and heading for the planet." Webb's mind raced. 50,000 was a small fraction of the total swarm, but it was still enough to devastate a planet. If they reached Arcturus Prime while the main Alliance forces were positioned around the asteroid belt. "Do we detonate now?" Park asked urgently. "We have 70% of the swarm in the kill zone." Webb shook his head. 70% is not enough. We need at least 80 to cripple them completely. If we detonate now, the remaining 30% will still be able to threaten the system. Then, what do we do about the units heading for the planet? Webb looked at the display, calculating distances and times. There was only one option. "I will deal with them personally," he said. "Have the Indomitable prepared for launch." "Sir, that is suicide," Park protested. "The Indomitable alone cannot stop 50,000 Kethani." Webb was already moving toward the door. "Not alone. Admiral, can you hear me?" "I hear you, General." The Varisian's voice came through the communicator. "I need volunteers. Ships willing to intercept the Kethani splinter force while the main fleet waits for the optimal moment to detonate. It will be dangerous. Some will not survive." There was a brief silence. Then Catherine spoke again. "My entire fleet volunteers, General. Every ship, every crew. We will not let those creatures reach Arcturus Prime." More voices joined in. The Threlkins, the Silithians, the Felixans. Ship after ship, species after species, all volunteering to join the suicide mission to protect the Alliance homeworld. Webb felt something catch in his throat. 6 months ago, these same species had refused to accept him as their leader. Now they were willing to die alongside him. "Thank you," he said simply. "All volunteering ships form up on the Indomitable. We launch in 5 minutes." The battle above Arcturus Prime was the most intense fighting of the entire war. 200 Alliance ships faced 50,000 Kethani, holding the line while the main swarm continued to gather in the asteroid belt. General Webb stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, directing the defense. His ship was at the center of the formation, drawing the heaviest attacks. The Kethani seemed to recognize that destroying it would break the Alliance formation. "Shields at 40%, the tactical officer reported. "Multiple hull breaches. Engineering reports that the main reactor is becoming unstable." "Hold the line," Webb ordered. "Just a little longer." On the tactical display, he could see the main swarm's position in the asteroid belt. 85%, 87, 90. The Kethani could not resist the organic bait. They were crowding into the kill zone in ever greater numbers. "General," the defense coordinator's voice came through the communicator. "We have 92% of the main swarm in the belt, ready to detonate on your command." Webb looked at the splinter force attacking his fleet. They had reduced it significantly, but there were still thousands of Kethani between them and the planet. If they detonated now, the remaining splinter force would still be able to cause massive damage. "Not yet," Webb said. "We need to clear more of the splinter force first." "Sir," the defense coordinator replied, "if we wait much longer, the main swarm may start to leave the belt. We could lose our chance." Webb knew the coordinator was right. Every minute they waited was a gamble, but he could not in good conscience detonate while thousands of Kethani were still threatening the planet. War Chief Gorak, Webb said into the communicator, "I need your warriors to make a push. Drive the splinter force back. Give us room to breathe." The Threlkin's response was a roar of approval. For the Alliance, for General Webb. The Threlkin ships surged forward, their warriors eager for glory. They crashed into the Kethani formation like a hammer, breaking through the enemy lines and creating chaos. The Varisians followed, their disciplined fire cutting down any Kethani that tried to reform. The splinter force began to collapse. Thousands of Kethani were destroyed in the assault. The remaining creatures, their coordination disrupted, began to scatter. Now Webb said, "Detonate." In the asteroid belt, millions of mining charges exploded simultaneously. The blast was visible from Arcturus Prime, a chain of fire that lit up the night sky. Asteroids shattered into fragments, creating a storm of debris that tore through the Kethani swarm. The effect was devastating. Billions of Kethani were destroyed in an instant. The survivors, stunned by the loss of so many of their kind, became disoriented and confused. They had never experienced such a catastrophic defeat. "All ships," Webb ordered, his voice carrying across the fleet, "engage the survivors. Do not let them escape. This ends today." The Alliance fleet attacked with everything they had. Ships from every species worked together in perfect coordination, hunting down and destroying the scattered Kethani. The battle lasted for hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. When it was finally over, the Kethani swarm had been reduced to less than 5% of its original strength. The remaining creatures fled into deep space, driven by the primal instinct to survive. They would not be a threat to the Alliance for generations. General Webb, Admiral Catherine's voice came through the communicator, tired but triumphant. "The enemy is routed. We have won." Webb slumped back in his command chair. He felt exhausted, drained of every last bit of energy, but he also felt something else. Pride, not in himself but in the beings he had been honored to lead. "We won together," he said, "all of us, remember that." The celebration on Arcturus Prime lasted for days. Representatives from every species in the Alliance gathered to honor the heroes of the battle. General Webb was given the highest medal the Alliance could bestow, the Star of Unity, which had only been awarded 3 times in the history of the organization. But for Webb, the greatest honor came in a private moment, away from the crowds and the ceremonies. Admiral Catherine, War Chief Gorak, the Silithian coordinator and Scout Master Rilla came to see him in his quarters. They brought with them a small gift, a crystal sphere containing a fragment of the asteroid belt, taken from the site of the Great Explosion. "We wanted you to have this," Catherine said, "a reminder of what we accomplished together." Webb took the sphere and held it up to the light. The crystal sparkled with fragments of rock and metal, each piece a tiny memory of the battle that had saved the Alliance. "When you were first appointed," Gorak said, "I did not believe you were fit to lead. I thought humans were weak, soft, inferior to the warrior races. I was wrong." The Silithian coordinator clicked in agreement. "You showed us something we had forgotten. That strength is not only about physical power or military tradition. It is about caring for those you lead, about fighting for something greater than yourself. And about never leaving anyone behind," Rilla added in her high voice. "You turned around for the supply ships when any other commander would have left them. That is when I knew you were someone worth following." Webb felt tears forming in his eyes. In 40 years of military service, he had received many honors and many words of praise. But none had meant as much as this. These 4 beings from 4 different species, telling him that he had earned their respect. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Catherine made the Varisian gesture of respect. "No, General, thank you, for showing us what humanity really is." After they left, Webb stood by the window of his quarters, looking out at the stars. The Alliance was safe. The Kethani were beaten. The different species that had been at each other's throats for centuries had learned to work together. And humanity, the young species that no one had taken seriously, had proven itself to the galaxy. There would be other challenges ahead. The universe was a dangerous place, full of threats yet to be discovered, but whatever came, the Alliance would face it together, united, strong. Led by a human, General Marcus Webb smiled and raised his glass to the stars. To humanity, he said quietly, and to all our friends among the stars, may we always stand together. And somewhere out in the darkness, on 100 different worlds, beings of 100 different species raised their own glasses in return. They did not know each other, had never met, might never meet, but they shared one thing in common. They had followed a human into battle, and they had won. That was something none of them would ever forget.